People on the internet have been debating full frame versus APS-C cameras for years. In this video, what I want to discuss is the merits of using either one of these for just simple portrait work. So if you're planning on taking pictures of your family, other people, how much of a difference does having a full frame sensor and a portrait lens really make? And hopefully by the end of this, we'll see whether or not the leap to something like the A9 or maybe the A7 III is worth it over just spending the money on a simple APS-C camera. So let's jump into some comparison shots. I took a bunch of these with my Sony A9 and the Sony 85mm f1.8, which is an excellent, very sharp portrait lens. The APS-C shots I took with my A6100, and this is the Sigma 56 f1.4, highly recommended lens. So this should be a very fair comparison. It's about the same effective focal length, so let's jump into it. Let's take a look at some photos here. I'm going to keep all of the full frame images on the left and all of the APS-C sensor images on the right. You'll notice a difference between the focal length and the lens that I'm using. So 85mm versus the 56mm Sigma. So here is the first portrait. Not much of a difference from a distance side by side, but let's punch in and see which one looks better. So both images nice and tack sharp, focus is nailed on the eyes. 6100 is a little bit sharper on the face, but the skin tones are a touch nicer on that full frame Sony A9. It looks like the face is a little bit smoother with the 85mm. There's more of a graininess with the APS-C, and you can see that even in the bokeh. You'll see that the ISO is at 640, which is lower than the 1250 on the full frame camera, but there's a little bit less grain in the background. Now, speaking of bokeh, both lenses and both cameras doing well in that regard. Bokeh is nice and creamy on both. There's a little bit brighter kind of green color with the APS-C lens, but I'd say between these two images, it's pretty much a toss-up. I mean, you can't really tell that one is necessarily better than the other, and you can certainly soften up the APS-C image and make it look just like the full frame image. This next portrait is wide open on both lenses, aperture priority on both cameras, nice and sharp on both, nailed on the eyes, and again, we're seeing kind of similar results. Not much of a difference here. Both images super duper nice and sharp. Background bokeh also nice and creamy on both lenses and both cameras. I mean, which one of those two shots looks better to you? I mean, it's a wash. Plenty of detail with the APS-C camera, plenty of detail with the full frame as you'd expect. So this is a tie for me. In good lighting conditions with a nice and sharp lens, you can get the performance of a full frame camera and a good lens on that camera for significantly less money. So this is kind of the appeal of APS-C, why I started using it, because you can achieve amazing results with a smaller, more inexpensive, more compact camera. Here is the next portrait, and let me just do this for a second, just because it might be easier to see. Here's the full frame shot, and here is the APS-C shot. Again, full frame shot and APS-C shot. Again, full frame, APS-C. Now, even though we are shooting at f1.8 and f1.4, you can see that on the full frame shot, there is a little bit better subject separation from the background, because with a full frame camera, you do get shallower depth of field. We are making up for it a little bit with the Sigma 56 because it's f1.4, but it still is not quite up to the shallow depth of field of the full frame camera. See, there's also a little bit of a difference in colors, and that has to do with obviously the lenses, the way that the camera is interpreting these JPEGs. So a little bit more contrasty with the APS-C camera, which I like. A little bit softer colors with the full frame. As we punch in, we see once again nice and sharp on both. Really not much of a difference. The shot from the full frame camera is a little bit lighter, and you can see that in just the color of this purple shirt. This is, again, I'd say a tie. There's really not much of a difference between these two, besides the slightly more shallow depth of field that you get. Don't get me wrong, the shot from the full frame is amazing. It's great, it's wonderful, but the APS-C camera, again with the Sigma, is keeping up quite nicely, I think. The This next shot is of my wife and son. He is growing up so fast. Let's punch in here, wide open on both lenses. And you'll see nailed focus on both. It's a little bit darker with that Sigma 56 on the APS-C, but nice and sharp. My wife is slightly out of focus on both cameras, is because I was focusing on my son's eyes, which is good. So not much of a difference in detail there. You can see all of the strands of hair. The background bokeh is nice and creamy on both. I mean, there's very little difference at all with this shot. Let's move on to the next one. Here we have my wife practicing some model poses. We'll punch in. Again, super duper sharp. Both of these lenses are so close. If you guys wanted a lens comparison between the 85 on a full frame and a 56 on a crop, you are getting that today. Maybe a touch sharper on the face if you look at the fine details, but focus is nailed on the eyes. Plenty of detail in the hair. Background bokeh looks incredibly good. And again, let's take a look at, here's the full frame image, here's the crop sensor image. Again, full frame, crop, full frame, crop, full frame, crop. You really cannot tell that one shot was taken with a $4,000 camera and the next shot was taken with a $600 camera. Next portrait, again, aperture priority, wide open on both lenses. For this one, interesting thing is the Sigma 56 actually missed focus. So not focused on the eyes, 85mm on that full frame, nailed focus, which is disappointing because I actually think that the colors of this image out of the APS-C camera look a little bit better. They're a little bit warmer. I like the overall look of this if it was in focus, but it isn't, so not much to compare in that one. Here's another shot of my wife, again, f2 versus f1.4, just to see what we could do with the background. You'll see that interesting thing here is the color difference. We are brighter, obviously, with the APS-C camera. When it comes to sharpness, look at this, wide open f1.4, nice and sharp, plenty of detail. I would say just as sharp as what we're seeing with the 85mm at f2. So background, you get a little bit bigger bokeh ball at f2, which is interesting. Again, subject separation when it goes to the full frame camera. I'd say that this image on the left looks better to me, the one from the full frame camera, but again, the APS-C performance that you're getting is not bad at all. Very sharp on the subject. And you can certainly fine-tune this image on the right and get it to look just like the full frame. So let's take a look at some low light shots here. These are done in aperture priority. I stopped them down to f1.8, so wide open on the 85 and stop down a little bit on the Sigma 56. And you'll see that the shutter speeds are different. Interestingly, the ISO values are the same, but the shutter speed is slightly slower on the full frame camera. It looks like we have a little bit of a softer image here. It looks like it's kind of motion blur, but it is a much cleaner image than the graininess that we're seeing. It's sharper on the APS-C, but it is definitely more grainy. Obviously, full frame cameras do better in low light. That's no question, no argument there. But it is interesting to see side by side kind of what the result looks like. So here in this shot, I had a street lamp helping us out. And actually exact same settings, shutter speed, f-stop, ISO is identical. Nice and sharp on both, but you will notice, especially in darker areas, you get a bunch more grain with that APS-C sensor because it does have to put in a little bit more work to collect all of that light. Here's another example I'm going to throw in just to show you guys the extra dynamic range that you get with a full frame camera. This is actually shot on my Sony A7 and the Tamron 28-75 versus the A6100 and the 16-55 from Sony. And you'll see the exact same thing, perhaps a little bit more amplified. Just look at how much grain you're getting with the APS-C censored camera because, again, there's not a lot of light out here. It's a lot smoother at ISO 12,800, and as you move into the background, you see kind of more of the same thing. Even though the full frame camera here has some grain, significantly less than what you're getting out of the APS-C camera. So if you're shooting in horrible lighting conditions, the full frame sensor, even if it's on a cheap A7, is going to help you out immensely. And in fact, if I move over, I believe I took another shot here. Here's just a shot of a street at sunset, very low light. And here we have the exact same settings on both cameras. Take a look at the blue sky here, and you'll notice just how much more grain there is with that APS-C sensor. As you move over, a lot of detail in this truck here in the reflection. It's grainy here. A ton of grain and noise versus not so much on the full frame sensor. So again, in terrible lighting conditions, absolutely the full frame sensor is the one to go for. So that's low light, but again, I want to reiterate, if you have good lighting, such as this portrait here, here is the Sony A7 versus the A6100. Similar settings, f2.8, but take a look at this. I mean, you can see that not only is the A6100 better at nailing focus on the eyes, the Sony A7 struggles, but the detail that you get from the APS-C censored camera is excellent. There's a ton of detail there, and I would pick the A6100 in a heartbeat over the A7 if I know I have decent lighting. So take that for what it's worth. Both of these cameras are great, and don't get me wrong, a full frame camera is not in any way worse than an APS-C camera, unless you're buying an old one like my A7 that struggles with autofocus. At the end of the day, a modern full frame Sony mirrorless camera such as the A7 III or this A9 is going to outperform an APS-C counterpart, but not by a whole lot, as you guys saw in that side-by-side comparison. I was pleasantly surprised to see just how well the APS-C camera kept up. And when you start looking at the pricing of both of these systems, I mean, you can get an APS-C camera and equivalent lens for half the price or even less of a good full frame camera and full frame lens. So from a bang for buck standpoint, APS-C is by far the way to go. But if you're looking for the ultimate, the best, and no compromises, and you're hopefully earning money doing this for a living, full frame is still the better bet overall. The last thing that I want to talk about is this idea of gear envy and everyone constantly pushing the full frame envelope. If you look on the internet, everyone tends to push people in the direction of buy a full frame, upgrade to full frame, get a full frame camera. And there are some benefits to this. I understand that. If you are a professional, like I said, and you need a camera that has dual card slots. So if you're shooting a wedding and you have all of your photos backed up on a second SD card in case the first one fails, that is a big benefit that's not offered in an APS-C Sony mirrorless camera at this point in time. But from a purely optical standpoint, if you're trying to achieve sharp photos with nice blurry backgrounds of your family members, your friends, whatever it is, you don't need anything other than a nice APS-C camera and a good lens. In fact, I've personally shot engagement photos with a Sony A6400 and the Sigma 56, and the client never asked about what camera I used, what gear I used. The photos were amazing, and they were very, very happy and impressed. So you do not need to spend twice the amount of money on a kit like this to get decent photographs. That's the biggest point that I'd like to make in this video. There are benefits, low light, there are benefits, dual card slots, there are other benefits, shallower depth of field, but in general, you get a whole lot more bang for your buck with an APS-C camera and a nice sharp Sigma Prime. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think of this comparison and what you guys are shooting with. I know that a lot of you are using your APS-C cameras, and that's great. A lot of you have upgraded to full frame. A lot of you are thinking about it. Hopefully this video helped some of you in that regard. And the number one key takeaway that I can give you guys is just go out there and take photos. Don't let the gear that you have hold you back. Even if you have a simple A6000, it's still a great camera. Don't think that you can't take amazing portraits very similar to what you get out of a full frame with your $300, $400, $500 APS-C camera. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for all of your likes, comments, and support. Stay tuned for more, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.